It was just huge. It was, at the time, ended up being the record-breaking crowd of the most amount of people that ever, came to that museum in the 75-year history of the museum. And on the opening day, there was, it's like supposed to be members only, and it's supposed to be limited how many people could go, but there's a lot of artists involved, and there was just a line that went like way down the block to get in, and it was just as big a crowd as they could possibly handle. It also got like a lot of publicity, like an Interview magazine out of New York, and I think it got in the New York Times and the LA Times a bunch of times, and a lot of other magazines that the museum normally, I think it got in Art Forum, and usually that museum would just, if they did a show, it would just barely get very much press coverage, but this just got crazy press coverage around the world. It would even be lucky if it got an Art Forum, because that's a New York art magazine, but I think this one did. And but it would just maybe get in local art magazines more, or local newspaper maybe, but this was another sign of its success, as it got huge publicity. Another interesting thing that is, at one point they go, oh, Walter Hopps is going to come and see the show. So I went and met this guy, Walter Hopps. And who Walter Hopps is probably the most famous living art curator in the world. At least he was living then. He passed away since then. And Walter Hopps is also the guy that started like the first big famous art gallery in LA called the Ferris Art Gallery. And he was the guy that wanted to give Von Dutch a show in the Ferris Gallery, and back in the 60s, and that would have elevated Von Dutch more into the art world status from a long time ago. And so you wouldn't have this, ignoring of like art from the hot rod world or from Von Dutch. But back then, Von Dutch didn't really care about the high art world, didn't care about that much, so he never did it. But it was fun to show Walter Hopps to the show. He thought it was an important show, and he came out to see that show. Also, Walter Hopps was the director or curator of the Pasadena Museum of Art, and he was famous for doing this Duchamp show in LA, back in the 60s. And so here's a guy that's doing Duchamp shows at a museum, thinks Von Dutch is, a worthy artist of having an art show at a good gallery or a museum. And he fought that so long that even, many years after that, he shows up to the Von Dutch show, the Custom Culture show. And he also was the curator that did this big auto show that Mocha in LA opened with, was Mocha. He started it, and he said that he wanted his show to be like Custom Culture at Mocha, where it was going to have like Roth and Von Dutch and Williams and all that. But he started the show, and other curators finished it, and it ended up being kind of a different show than he started, but he said Custom Culture was really the kind of show he wanted to do. It was in the early 80s, like maybe 82, something like that. There was a big car show at Mocha. And all this got refreshed to me because I was reading Ganal's book on Von Dutch, and in there he interviews Walter Hopps, and Walter Hopps talks about this stuff, and I go, yeah, I forgot about that. I was just rereading it. Well, first it was very visually appealing. There was a lot to look at, eye candy. So it had the visual thing going, and it was sort of rebelling against the normal museum show that was more about ideas. Normal art at this time is about the ideas more important than the art. So therefore you could have a brick with a fishbowl on it, and water and rocks in it, and that's art, which it was, but then you had to learn about why it was art and what the artist was thinking, and you had to sort of buy in to that whole artist's philosophy and his style of art and all that. And, people get really tired of that, and a lot of people don't like it, and, and they don't want to do all that work. But that's just the way art was, and so this was kind of the opposite show, where it was more just visually nice to experience. And I think it also had a huge nostalgic thing, because so many people grew up with all this art, and they all recognized it as a kind of art, but they never saw it plugged into a museum. And finally they go, yeah, yeah, it should be in a museum, yeah. you know, this art did influence Billy L. Bankston and Craig Kaufman and Robert Irwin and a lot of these artists that had been shown in museums for years, and they were the finish fetish artists. They gave credit to the custom car guys for influencing the mainstream art, but the whole art world just always ran with these guys and always credited the car guys, but the museum world never gave the car guys the show that, you know, showed how they were influenced. Mm-hmm. That was the art that you would see, and I just thought it was nice to show the car thing, but where these guys were getting all that and tie those two together. And another thing was, another weird example of the tie-in between the high art and the hot rod art stuff was that one time I met this lady named Elise Grinstein, and her and her husband, Sidney Felsen, owned this super blue chip printmaking organization in LA called Gemini, GEL, and they would have, somehow they knew about Von Dutch because they grew up in the car culture, and they'd have Von Dutch stripe their Jaguar, you know, like once or twice a year. And so somehow they had this party, and they had all those Finnish fetish artists show up at the party, and somehow they had Von Dutch show up at the party, but they also had this New York artist, Roy Lichtenstein, show up from New York. And so they're at the party, and she was talking about being at that party, and all the California artists, like, they don't go talk to Roy Lichtenstein from New York. They're all interested in what Von Dutch was saying and wanted to talk to Von Dutch and ask him questions. So Von Dutch had this crowd around him, but the New York guy, you know, that should be the influence, that should be more important, you know, they didn't really want to talk to him. Yeah, so it was kind of like, it seemed like this guy should get credit. It seemed like he should be in a museum show, and it seems like everybody should know what this guy did. It seemed like it was all there, and it was just a matter of getting it all done.